Good evening, good afternoon, or wherever you happen to be. Good day. This evening's Dharma talk is titled Deeper Causality. Deeper causality, cause and effect. This causes that. This moving through the air causes that. Cause, effect. The cause and effect because another cause is because. Because we need to know who did what, who's responsible, who caused it, what caused it, how did it happen, and what did they cause, what happened, what did occur, what is the outcome of that movement through space over to that circular bowl-shaped piece of steel. And what I want to talk about a little bit here, and I'm happy to take questions. Questions actually will bring this more into view, into focus than just my commentary. Anything I have to say about the Dharma has helped a great deal by your questions. So please don't hesitate. In a few minutes, please ask questions. So deeper, I just mean to point out that aspect of causality that is ignored because we want a result. We want to know who did that, who's to blame, who gets credit, who's to blame. So if you've studied the Buddha Dharma, you know that there is a saying, a slogan that says that all dharmas meaning, dharma is a Sanskrit word that means truth. All dharmas are without blame. So they're also without credit. They're not to blame. There's no dharma that has any kind of direct cause and effect. It sure the hell looks that way. And as we are being people in an apparent singularity and functioning as a singularity, as a human form, with the six sense fields and their objects, and the five skandhas, form, feeling, perception, concept of the thinking process, the logic, and the six sense fields and their objects, very simply. These skandhas, or translate that word skandha as a heap or a grouping, and those five heaps get together, hang onto hands and pull on each other and reinforce each other to convince us that we are somebody, someone, somewhere, at some time in some place, who is the subject of effects and is the cause of effects. We accomplish this, we get a degree, we get a graduate degree, we have children, there are children. The children aren't the children's children. There are children. There are property, so to speak, at least for a time. And so the deeper causality, this might sound a little bit simple-minded, but I need to do it this way because if I start out very simple, then I want to say you need to multiply this. You need to bring it to whatever you mathematicians would bring it to the 100th power, 1000th power. Is when you take this kotsu, this nyoi, and bring it across through space, and it strikes this bell. This bell. You think it's this bell? Why does it sound like that? It's not that bell. It's a different bell. So what am I saying? This striking that can't happen unless somebody has to make this. It has to be extracted from the inside of a huge plant. We call it a tree. And then it's formed, then it's shaped. And then someone makes that gong or bell, which happened in Vermontville, Michigan. That's a big lie, by the way. I have no idea where it was made. But then the other thing we quite often miss is who made this? Because without this hand moving this through space, that cause and that effect will not come about. Everything is dependently originated. This is called, what's the fancy word? Pratitya samutpada is the Sanskrit, I believe, unless I've got it wrong, which I could have. I get a lot of things wrong. So the deeper level of this means that no one really gets credit for anything and no one really gets to blame for anything. This does not mean that you don't have responsibility here as a human being in the middle of this huge landscape. Of course you do. You are not to blame for anything. You don't get credit for anything, but you're responsible for everything. So you need to take care of everything as it shows up in the line of dependent origination, as it shows up in your house, in your hand, in your eyesight, in your ears, as it shows up. Respond to that. The ability to respond. We're not talking about responsibility. The way I use it is not about blaming somebody. Often, well, you're responsible. Who's responsible for that? That's a misunderstanding, because it is a loaded word that sounds like somebody is to blame. Misunderstanding. And it's such an incredible misunderstanding that most of the world is operating out of that misunderstanding, that some people get credit, some people get blame. So I'll just create a little story here that might be helpful. Long time ago, years ago, I used to teach in prisons. I teach meditation and Buddhism. I'd still do that if it weren't for the virus. A few other students of mine also teach in prisons. Went and teach meditation. There was a fellow I met there many years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and he was in prison because of breaking a law, robbing something or someplace. But his mother and his father, not ones that he selected, were addicts. They were addicted to crack, and he had no home life. He had no family life. They did the best they could with trying to look through their difficulty with their drug situation. And so he needed some kind of a family, some kind of friendship. So he joined a gang, and the gang eventually went and robbed and killed someone. And so, but I'm saying cause and effect. You could say, well, it's his fault. Or you could even say, well, it's his parents' fault. But we don't know what they went through. We don't know what kind of upbringing they had. And not only the upbringing in current time and place for anything or anyone or anybody, but also the deeper, which is what I wanted to talk about somewhat here. And you ask me the questions, there isn't anywhere I won't go. You can't ask me a question about something that I can't comment on, even if all I say is, damned if I know, but I will comment on it. And I want you to do that. I want you to help me. We do this as a mutual thing. It might look like you don't know anything and I know stuff. I don't know anything. And you know stuff. And that's the problem. You think you know stuff, and I know I don't know anything. Reflect on that a little bit. Might sound like I'm a little proud of that. Maybe I am. Or maybe you're projecting your own pride onto me, because the only way you can see your own pride is by projecting it on somebody. No one's to blame. No one gets credit. But everyone's responsible. There isn't a thing that's going on anywhere that isn't your direct responsibility. If you don't understand, you could ask questions. But before you do that, I want to say that this deeper cause and effect goes beyond this physical form. When I say beyond, it's not really going anywhere. It just goes deeper. Before this body-mind came up, who you actually are has always been present. It can't disappear because it hasn't appeared. There is not an objective present that comes and goes. It's not something that comes into being. If something doesn't come into being, it can't pass out of being. And who you are doesn't come into being. The body does, and the consciousness adheres or combines with that or joins in with that so that it can animate in an apparent what? Illusion. What is that illusion? 3 dimensions. 3-dimensional. Well, this is because we're so used to it, because I can reach over here and pick up the striker. I can pick up the gong. I can put it back. I can get up and leave the room. I can do all kinds of things. And that gives us the illusion that there's someone somewhere doing something because of the alignment with the consciousness that is operating through the 6 sense fields and their objects through sense of touch, sense of taste, sense of hearing, sense of smell, sense of seeing, sense of thinking. This is an incredible illusion. And why is it so convincing? Because that's so damn, it's so solid. I mean, it's here. We're here. We're here. But when you go to sleep at night, you go into a dream world, which also seems very solid, but it's only relatively so. This, as it says, the Tibetans say, the dream you have at night is the sample dream. It's what shows you what a dream is. Unreal. It's an unreal illusion. And the dream you have, and that dream you have at night is a sample dream that points to you that this, when you wake up, this is the real dream. This is the actual dream. That one you have at night is just a sample. Just gives you an example of how a dream works. It looks real, but it's not. This looks real, but it's not. That doesn't mean that the dream didn't exist. It existed in a certain dimension, but that's gone. And now this exists in a certain dimension. This will be gone. You know what that's called? It's called death. Death comes without warning. I don't mean to be nihilistic or to ruin the day, particularly. But the deeper quality of culpability, or the deeper quality of causality, isn't just limited to. It also happens in dreams, and it also happens before this body-mind complex of mine or of yours came into being. In my case, close to 80 years ago. In your case, maybe 25 or 30 years ago, whatever age you are. And it won't last. It's coming up. It's here. You have a name. You have a particular level of intelligence. You're really, really intellectual, or you're very, very intuitive, or you have a little bit of intuition that always gets confused with your intellect. So you have these little interior arguments with yourself. Am I making fun of you? Kind of. I get to do that. So what fundamental am I pointing out? I'm trying to say, don't jump. When I say jump, I'm just saying don't. I'm saying don't jump, I guess. Don't jump to conclusions. As soon as you conclude anything, and there's plenty of room for questions around this. As soon as you conclude anything, this is what happens to your investigation intelligence. It shuts down. It's called ignorance. Ignorance form. Ignorance is what is happening, and formation is ignorance form. And the form is your opinion, your idea, your conclusion about that. You've actually stopped looking at that, because if you look at that, you look at anything, it never holds still long enough for you to conclude anything. And that's uncomfortable for the ego mind, the self-centered mind, the narcissistic mind, the mind that is concluding that it is someone. That's the basic misunderstanding is you think, I'm not accusing you of anything, you can dispute this. But it looks like you think that you're a solid being who does this, doesn't do that, likes this, doesn't like that. And we tend to buy into that solidity because it gives us a feeling of artificial, as it is, of security. We grasp our children, we grasp our family, we grasp our career, we grasp our Dharma books, for that matter. We grasp we hang on to things. And this is why I say over and over again, I'm saying it again now, you don't need to let go of anything. You just need to see what you're hanging on to. If you see what you're hanging on to, you might have to look at that clutched aspect of the mind for quite a while before it starts to collapse or come apart or relax. So the dependent origination, the causality that happens from here to there is very simple. And this mind, the self-centered mind, is operating on that basically. This happens, that happened. Who did this? Who caused that? I caused this. You caused that. Who did that? So when someone, like that was the example I was used of the young man who was imprisoned when he was 14 for being in a gang and being part of a robbery. You know, I'm not saying that there wasn't some culpability, of course, but not to go to prison for 40 years. it was difficult to talk to this young man. And a little added aspect of it, he was black and was from Detroit. But the difficulty that we don't take care of each other, that we immediately, we want some kind of positionality, some kind of security that we're a person who wouldn't do such a thing. So therefore, we're going to lock that person up. Society is flooded with this kind of thing, as we know. I'm not pointing out one specific thing that's happened. It's all over. Praise and blame, praise and blame. Nobody gets credit. But if you're born and when you're 16 years old, suddenly you're just, you studied the violin and now you can play Mozart on the violin, and other people study for years and years and can't play anything. Now, that doesn't mean that you're a wonderful person who accomplished that. No, you're born that way. I'm not saying you might not have to practice, of course. I mean, even Rumi has to practice the piano. Play piano. That's a sign of a musician when somebody 2 years old says, play piano. So again, I'm not asking you or suggesting that you completely don't think about any of it, but don't think about cause and effect in it, or this caused that. Of course, we want to do that, but be quite tentative or circumspect before you lock down on blaming anything for anything, anyone for anything or any one situation. Quite often, it's much more complicated than that. When you get up in the morning, possibly you might get up and feel out of sorts, or maybe even to the point where you might use the common reference there as depressed. Stop naming things. I'm saying if you go to the doctor and they ask you how you're doing, you might have to use a common word. But the less you can label things and the more you can see what you're about to put a label on top of, you begin to see the texture of what that is. And then there's some possibility, painful as that may be, of actually understanding what the dependent origination experience that is still in the form of texture or a label or judgment caused by this or caused by that, or I'm not getting enough water, I need more vitamin D. I'm not saying this isn't true. Maybe it may be true, but you could start out with just the texture itself. Stay with the initial first thought, as Trungpa Rinpoche used to say, first thought, best thought. The first thing it rises up is probably pretty close to the source material of what that fundamental, the essence of that situation. It's closer to that. Might not be that. There might be a lot more elaborations going on in terms of deeper causation happened from how you were treated when you were 14 and so on. There's so much that we don't know in terms of just general information, but there's even more that we don't know as far as what this is. What is this human experience? Is it an experience? Is there an experiencer? Again, is this an experience? Is there someone experiencing this? Find out. Look, the main issue is mistaken identity, as I understand it from studying the Buddha's Dharma for a number of years and training the mind to see more clearly, not to think more clearly, just to see what this is fundamentally. So if you have some questions, I'd be happy to respond, or I can just keep chattering away. Chazan, go ahead.
Can we look at deeper causality without it being a speculative practice? Bowing.
That's a good question, and I would think I would keep the speculation if it arises spontaneously out of you're looking at something and some kind of speculation comes up. You include that also, but don't build on it into some kind of scientific modality where you're trying to get a particular kind of truth. So let the speculation come up, but don't fuel it. In other words, don't perpetuate that or keep that going. Like a detective at a crime scene would be looking for certain kinds of things. And it's not that that's not relatively accurate or correct, but what we're talking about here is the nature of things that actually go beyond the physical a physical particularity. Go ahead, please. If you have more.
How can we look at those deeper causes when they're not apparent or when they're not showing up as phenomena? Bowing.
So this is why the sitting practice of meditation, shikantaza, that's where this comes in. And there will be times when there's just isn't much happening other than you're just endeavoring. Your intention is to observe. And sometimes there's not much to see. What you might be observing is that there's not much showing up. It might look like just a white wall, or it might look like, or you might feel like you've lost consciousness for a little while since there's no particular movement in the consciousness. Am I going in the direction of your question, or?
She's on bowing. Can the striker connecting with the gong be the deeper causality?
Yes, can be.
Is there a deeper causality beyond what we can perceive through the sense fields that we could actually work with directly?
I think it's possible. Don't stop there.
I don't know how to go into that because it does or interact with it. Bowing.
Just continue. You don't have to pack a lunch. I mean, you don't have to do something to go somewhere else. It's right in front of you. What you're looking for, and you've heard me say this probably dozens of times, if not hundreds. What you're looking for, you're looking at. Your heart's desire is always in front of you. Just to put it simply.
If we were to use, for example, maybe something more personal, like an emotion that's arising, and we're trying to, or we're working with that in our practice. The shallow part's pretty obvious. It's like, oh, I'm angry because of this. What is the deeper causality of that anger that we could bring into our practice?
If you're the way you're asking me, I would say it is the anger. The texture of the anger is just below your ideas about the anger. But in order to see the texture of the anger, you can't go into it conceptually. You have to don't negate it. This is why I say over and over again, whatever's moving, look at it. And if it holds still, you can still look at it. Because if it starts to hold still, then it's about to go away. It's about to dissolve or morph into some other situation. So whatever's showing up is, if you agree with it, it hangs around. If you dispute it, it hangs around. And if you ignore it, it tends to hang around because it's dependently arisen. And so you're actually adding to the activity of it to keep it, give it some longevity. Whereas if you don't do anything with it, it begins to collapse. The ego mind, the self-centered mind, does not like that. The ego mind, the self-centered mind, needs to know something about something. We need to know I'm here and I'm. We don't like that empty, open dimension where we don't have a reference point that supports us as an individual entity in a particular form in a lifetime with fingertips and eyes and ears, nose, tongue, body, mind. We don't like that feeling of not being anyone in particular. It's too open. It's too spacious. We get, what's the common word for that? Fear of open spaces, agoraphobia. We're afraid of all. There's just too much room, so we want something. We'd rather have fear than have that just be an open dimension. So going back to your question, I would say whatever shows up is. I would say the very thing it is could be a concept about what it's covering up. The label, like if you simple example is if you wake up in the morning and you feel bad, you feel depressed, you have a negative kind of overlay or clouds in your mind stream that are just not good. They don't feel so good. But what we do is we find a word that fits that, like depression or anxiety, possibly if it's more active than just flat depression. And that gives us gives us some distance from it. It might not show up as distance, but at least we know what it is. We have a reference point. As soon as you have that reference point, that naming, that kind of picking and choosing around it, it sets up a structure that gives you the illusion, insofar as there's a self, an ego, or a belief in a solid being, it gives you artificial, temporary, pretty temporary protection from that. Not a lot, but enough so that you'll take it. I'll take that protection. I don't have much, but it gives me a little bit of space, a little bit of distance from the incredible immediacy of that feeling. And what's being said here from the point of view of the teachings on awareness, basic teaching of encouraging you or me or anyone to go down into whatever is showing up. And so it takes some courage. It takes some intention that you to put it in words. I would say, I want to see what this is, no matter how much it hurts. I want to see what this is, no matter how scary it is. You might not be able to do it this week, but if you have an intention to do that and you continue to return to the awareness that can see deeply into this, which is your natural Buddha nature. If you want to see that, then this is possible. It just takes intention, it takes repetition, and it takes a kind of stubbornness. You're going to do this. You're not going to give up. You're going to find out what this is. You're going to find out who this is and what this is fundamentally, not just a name like some old man and a group of people and on Zoom and a room full of books and incense smoke. You're going to find out fundamentally what it is. And I can tell you in a couple of words what it is, but I want you to discover this. It is not separate. There isn't a separate thing anywhere. I see this, you can see this. If you're interested. If you're not, then there's lots of other stuff to do. You could learn to play the lute. Or is there an instrument called a Pasquale?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Isn't Carl on there?
Is Carl on there somewhere? Well, I know there isn't because I just made that up. You might say, why would you do such a thing? Yes, go ahead. Unyo.
You're bowing. So you said we're responsible for everything?
Yes.
Even, what about last Wednesday with the uprising in our capital?
We're responsible for all of that. You're not to blame for it. That's an individual they cause. We know who's to blame for all of that. It's easy to locate that. But we're responsible for that. We have to respond. We have to respond to everything. And how you respond is dependent upon how this all appears to you. And it's possible to do this without singularity, without picking out one particular thing that is right and one particular thing that is wrong. It is possible to respond to this, seeing the dependent origination and actually see that there's no one to blame for that. There's no individual, no matter how horrible one particular person seems to be, or several seem to be. There's no one's responsible. If we go that direction, then we have what? More warfare. Then this whole thing goes down into the shadows, and then 3 years, 8 years, 15 years, 25 years, come back out again into the light. And then we have that to deal with again. And it's called samsara, the constant wheel of life and death and life and death. You can transcend that. This old man, you're probably ready to hear this. Whether you will or not, I don't know. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But I don't think it will just happen to you. You won't just suddenly awaken. There have been a few people in history that apparently have just been spontaneous realizers, suddenly realized their true nature. And usually if you realize your true nature without any discipline, it will probably freak you out, like it has some people. But if you have some kind of a basis for it, then seeing your true nature, which can be quite scary to the ego. If you do it over a long period of time, might be more workable for you. Further question, you know?
When you're bowing, sometimes it gives me a feeling of despair.
Yeah. That's not inappropriate. It is sad. People suffering so much. Yeah, I understand that. But as far as this is to blame for that, it's dependently arisen. There's so many causes and conditions that show up that support the situation that shows up as the terrible things that have been happening in the last few days.
So what would be that deeper causality of what occurred today in our country or last Wednesday?
You can't trace them. Any particular thing that occurs, even this, you'd have to, in order to find out the cause of this, you'd have to find out where this came from, who made this, what that happened there, where these hands came from. I'm using that as a simple-minded example of cause and effect that is very deep. Not only that, but then there's all the depth to this person who's been around for quite a number of decades, and all the things that this person has been through to end up in this room, to end up here, to end up on this kind of technology where we're talking to, a couple dozen people. The causes and conditions there are untraceable. You cannot find the first source for anything. The idea that there is a source for something, for any one thing, is an illusion. Anytime you find any source, you're ignoring all the rest of them. But the ego mind so much wants to have control of its life, of her life, his life, their life, that it will settle for limited blame. Well, it's because of this. Well, you know why you're doing that, don't you? You're doing that because of what she said, or you know why you're feeling this way. And this is why, in the way that I teach education in terms of the Dharma, is no tests. Nobody's tested. Testing people is a misunderstanding of education. It's a horrible thing to do to young people, let alone old people, is to treat them all the same and make sure that everybody can remember everything they were taught. This is just, what do I want to say? What's a really good word? Stupid. That's a good one. It's a misunderstanding of how to fundamentally help people train their minds to see clearly. So to set up some kind of standard where just the people who have a good memory can pass the test. And that doesn't mean they know anything about what's happening. They just remember everything. So what is that about? It's about control, and it's about being able to give you a degree, but not you. When the whole idea of degrees is a misunderstanding. I'm sure you've noticed that you can't just teach in a university because you know something about the material. You have to have a credential. And I'm sure any of you have been in education at all, realize that there are a lot of people that have all kinds of degrees and all kinds of credentials that really can't teach what they're supposed to. They have the degree and they have the credentials, so they get paid to do that. And then you have to live with that. Don't misunderstand. I'm not impugning anybody's education or degrees. I'm just saying it's not as dependable as they like to make out. Well, if you have the degree on your wall, then certificate, then that must mean. No, it doesn't. I don't have any degrees. Look how smart I am. Jeez. I don't see too many smiles, mostly frowns. I'm just saying you could consider that. You could consider it. The testing thing actually gets in the way of it because the people who are giving the test want to control it, and they want to evaluate if what they're teaching you is working by testing your memory. Why do they test your memory? Why wouldn't they just not test you and just train you? That's why I say when people come and study the Dharma in our study groups, which some of you people join that, some don't, but some do, is you don't have to learn. You don't have to understand what you're studying. It's just a misunderstanding. It's to set up a standard for 10 people, 15 people, 100 people. This is what it means to learn this. Not a good idea. Not a good idea. I'm not saying you couldn't have a subject, but to confine people with there's only one way this can be understood, not a good idea to do that. It's not fundamentally helpful. It doesn't actually acknowledge our incredible intelligence as human beings, and especially really respect the way different people's intelligence shows up differently. Any of you have children, especially if you have several of them, notice how much different the intelligence shows up in each child. Completely different ways. Some children don't do well in school, but are extremely, their deep understanding is not so strong. It's being process. Okay, I've done enough scolding. Now I'll answer some questions if you have them.
Junshu bowing.
Yes, Junshu.
You said we need to respond to everything.
Yes.
How do we do a situation when our anger has put a lot of distance between us and that situation?
Silence. Silence is a response. Silence. Don't. If I'm understanding what you're asking me, don't do anything. Drop your gaze. Relate to the anger. If I'm assuming that you're talking about anger that you would feel, and how do you relate to that? Is that what you're saying?
The situation when anger arises and separates us from that.
Yeah. Drop your gaze. Drop your gaze slightly. Be very aware of your body position, and feel the anger. Don't abandon the anger for what caused it, please, because what caused it is very, very limited. The depth of the causes of that anger it just goes on forever. We've talked about this somewhat. So it's not like your mom caused your anger, or this person acting a certain way caused you to be angry. I'm not saying it didn't trigger it, but the anger is yours. Excuse me, in the sense that there's a solid being, but even in the sense that there's a discontinuous being, it's still your the very aspect of consciousness is inquiring here and asking me about this. That aspect of consciousness, that so-called centrality of the consciousness that shows up as a self, that's the area. And so what I'm saying, do it with your body. Stay embodied, and if you can, without a lot of shackles on yourself, don't change your posture, slow things down so you don't stare daggers into someone, or point fingers, or bark at them. In other words, you're responsible for those feelings. Those are your feelings. The person that might have triggered that may not, or the situation that triggered it may not do that at all. It may just be the trigger action of it. So let's go deeper if you want to go deeper in that. Be more specific. Put me on the spot. I don't mean make it impossible for me to talk, but you can ask me anything you want, and I'll do my best to respond in a way that possibly can help you.
Junshu bowing. How is seeing the dependent as in nature of something different from seeing why it's happening?
So the why it's happening is short-sighted. In other words, you just see the somebody said something or did something or something happened that triggered. In other words, resonated, the particular frequency of that resonated with areas in your consciousness that you have locked down on and shut down on. It's one way of looking at it. Whereas a sitting practice of meditation, that area starts to loosen up. And eventually, if you watch what moves, eventually that very hidden aspect of the consciousness, sometimes called in the Buddhist tradition is the alaya vijnana, or the hidden area of the conscious, that storage area where things are stuffed. And so the other aspect of your question was, how does that help? And what was the other part of it? You're not going to pass the test if you don't remember that.
I asked how seeing dependent origination is different from seeing why something's happening.
Yeah, so seeing that things are dependently originated, using that concept, you begin to see that, like, kind of a simple example I'm using here. Where did this come from? Where do the hands come from? There's so many things. Any occurrence, that one has so many, as it says in the sutra, tributary streams flowing through the darkness. you can't trace those down. You can't find all the little tiny bits and pieces of causation that any one given event or situation. It's just too elaborate. But what the ego mind does is to tune in on something and just make it seem like one thing. It's like one solid person, like one solid situation, or the anger you're feeling be one solid thing that you've got to either get rid of, you got to find out what caused it, rather than just see that it's just energy. If you see what this is, if you see who this is, and you begin to see what that is, then you've heard me say this before, you won't care how you feel. You are completely fine with any kind of causes and conditions that run through your mind stream as anger, irritation. You're no longer, it's not that you're not don't have some kind of triggering still going on, but it can't find, that emotion cannot find a being who is voting for that. I can't find a being that agrees I'm having that, I'm angry. It's possible for anger to show up without someone who's angry. The identity part is a misunderstanding. It's a mistaken identity that there's a solid being who's having those feelings or that idea. And that's what keeps it tumbling around. That the being does not want that. Or the being, maybe the being doesn't want it, but the being wants to know why it's happening. See if we can blame somebody or something. And it's not that you couldn't find causes and conditions that would show up as lots of different causes for that, but tracing that down is not going to help particularly. It would just show you how complicated. It would show you dependent origination. But if you see dependent origination, then you realize that even your identity, even the ego part of it, it's just part of dependent origination. So the singularity of things is lost in the multiplicity. It's like suddenly you realize you're like a little piece of sand in the middle of the Gobi Desert, or maybe the Mojave. You find that you're just like a little dot. You're there. There's somebody. There's something. But it's like you're nobody from the point of view of any kind of relative situation.
Thank you. There's a question on YouTube from Robert Switek.
Robert.
He asks, is there a texture to deeper causality that can be observed or received related to present circumstance when emotions arise?
Yes, I feel that there is. I just think it takes. It's not going to happen in 3 days or 3 years. It takes determination to do this, and it's so much easier just not to do it and just distract yourself with something else to do with your life. The issue or the problem with that is because everything is there are times, one whole period of your life, maybe 3 or 4 weeks or 3 or 4 years or 10 years where things are going pretty good. Everything's going really well. And then suddenly everything starts to come apart just because of dependent origination and because everything is happening in a cyclic way, like the phases of the moon. Some people are extremely sensitive to the phases of the moon. I know people, I have students who are very sensitive to that. They could probably tell you which phase the moon is in. They're that sensitive to that. Does this mean they're better than others, or they're more this, more that? No, it just means that there is so much going on. It is so complicated. So the sooner the capital, was it S? Yeah. The sooner you can find out who you are, the sooner all of this will begin to settle down, and you'll be able to enjoy your life. Enjoy what this is. If you want to be happy, take care of others.
Anna, bowing. Can
Yes,
you
Anna.
talk about guilt in terms of everything that we're talking about? The feelings of guilt. What is that?
Yeah. So guilt is just as a particular way that self-centeredness works. Feeling like you did something and you feel guilty, or you feel ashamed, or you feel like you're not worth anything, or you did something wrong, or or you showed up. Some people feel guilty, don't even know why. They just feel ashamed. They can't function, and they can't find a source for it. They might like to find the source, and chances are the source for that would still be not something operable, and that they can actually remove it. So it's just a feeling like you did something or something happened. The opposite end of guilt would be pride. Would be, never guilty. We all have examples in our society of people who are totally never, ever going to feel guilty about anything. They are so full of themselves. But that won't last. Death comes without warning. And that's going down. That the structure that holds that together is the body-mind complex and the particular karma that shows up behind that, the cause of which the causes and conditions. You might as well have the branches and roots of every tree that has ever grown. Because there's that many different things coming together to form this one situation of I feel guilty. So it's dependently arisen. There's no one who's guilty. That doesn't mean there isn't guilt. So I would say rather than operate on trying to get rid of guilt or cover up guilt or be a person who's not guilty, that just generates more activity around supporting the primary illusion, or which is mistaken identity, thinking there is someone who can get rid of guilt or not feel guilty anymore, or feel more pride or more self-esteem. A lot of psychologists, therapists, and so on, they're not wrong. Sometimes that's the only kind of help that people are ready for. But this kind of so-called, if I may call it that, help as training your mind, is to see that there is no person. Junshu. It's not that there isn't something there, but it's not a. And so therefore the guilt that is dependently arisen may come and go. And it may come, you may continue to have guilt, not that you have it, because you're asking a question, or I may continue to have guilt or be ashamed of something for the rest of my life. But there's no person who is culpable. There's no singularity called a culprit. If you think there is, then you'll not only torture others, but you'll torture yourself, maybe inadvertently. Whole society is doing that. We're really, really mean to each other. Other question, Anna?
No, I think that answers it. I think why I ask in this context is because, especially when we talk about just not blaming instead of the concept of forgiving, it feels that this idea of nobody being guilty, which I fundamentally believe, at least I think I do. Okay. Sometimes my ego thought is, do I only feel that way to guarantee that I am also not not possibly guilty? But I guess that's okay.
Well, let me address what you said. If you've heard me talk very much, you might recall, or maybe not. But I don't recommend that you forgive anybody. What I would recommend is don't blame anybody. Then you'll have to forgive anybody. Don't blame them. If you're blaming somebody, don't forgive them. Just retract the blame, because they aren't fundamentally to blame. It's not that they didn't stab somebody or steal your silverware or something like that. So there's a relative blame happening there. But it's good to reify the culprit and reify the wonderful person that you are, or I am. How wonderful are, well, I carried that around for a long time. Finally, I just forgive them and I just feel so much better. Well, I just, to use a strong word there, I think that's wrong. You thought I was going to say bullshit, didn't you?
I guess I don't know you after all.
No, you don't.
I was ready for it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question. Any further questions would be good if you have them. We're kind of out of time somewhat, but not really. We can go another few minutes. I'm all about questions. So if you have them, when this is over with, I'll go somewhere and fall over. But right now, I'm all about answering your questions if you have them, especially about anything what Anna was talking about guilt or forgiveness. That's a very interesting area, and I have some very strong, possibly unpopular approaches to that.
Thank you, Bowing. There are a few questions on YouTube.
Okay.
One from Domino. He asks, is it a spy operation to reveal snakes in the grass?
That's very esoteric. Okay, read that again. Okay, is it a spy operation to reveal? Where can I read that? Let's see. Here it is. Is it a spy operation to reveal snake in the grass cabal? Cabal, is that on there?
You scroll up a little, it's more clear. It says, is it a spy operation to reveal snakes in the grass as it is?
That's really, I'm not sure exactly what it is you want to know from me, but I would say, based on what you say there, I would say, let's see, little snake in the grass, symbolic. Let's see, spy is someone who peeks in. Operation is an actual process happening of the spy peeking into something, and it's into the grass, and there's a snake there. Yes, it is. I'm glad I could solve that problem for you. And if there was some other kind of esoteric structure behind that I missed on, that I should have come up with a more zen-y answer, then help me with that. Further question?
Shane in Virginia asks,
Shane.
how do I work with really bad lower back pain and sciatica and keep practicing and sitting? I can't sit in a chair. That's even worse.
We'll find some place where you can hold still. And if that happens to be on your side in bed or something like that, you could do that. You could do that. But if you have a compromise of a chronic pain or something, a lot of people have chronic pain. Pay attention to that. Don't force anything. But the stillness is what's important. Even if it's only for a short period, even if you only sit still for a couple of minutes. And then when you sit still, watch what continues to move. Use the contrast of your body stillness to watch the movement of the mind. It'll become it'll become sharper. You'll see more clearly what it is. When I say see more clearly what it is, you won't know what it is, but you'll see more clearly what it is. And what I mean by that, I use it's like seeing the shadow of something. Clearly, you clearly see that shadow. It may take you a while looking at that shadow to realize what is the shadow of. That takes a while. This is why it's called practice, and it's called discipline. Sit down, hold still, hold a form without being rigid or macho. Be very gentle. You could even say be motherly about take care of yourself. There's all these macho meditations are just that. There's just too much control happening there. Not enough consideration for the nature of the mind. Any final questions on there?
Anna Maria bowing.
Go ahead, Anna Maria.
This morning I was reading the slogan "Drive all blame into one."
Yes.
And I was thinking specifically about a situation which later that afternoon occurred, and I kind of failed miserably at driving all blame into one.
Huh.
So my question is, how do you accept the blame without reinforcing somebody else's delusion?
Yeah.
And or accountability.
Don't worry about that.
And or
don't worry. Let me step in. Unless you're not finished, then I can wait. Go ahead.
No.
Don't worry about that. Don't be concerned about what they do with that. That is their situation. What you can do is receive the blame. This doesn't mean you make a show of it, or you particularly let them off the hook. It's very situational. And if you're training your mind, and if you're working with your own mind, and you're watching your own mind stream without giving yourself a hard time, like adding on to the crap that's already flowing through there, not that you're having crap. I'm just talking about my own situation. When I sit down and hold still, everything's welcome. I no longer am standing at the door checking the ID if somebody wants to come in. Everybody's welcome. Every dragon comes in, every monster, every piece of shit is welcome. And why? If it arises, you need to see that. My other way of saying it, I don't mean to see it, you are to blame for anything, but you've got it coming. Insofar as it comes your way, this is your life. Don't miss your life by shutting the door on things you object to, or you think you don't deserve that, or some of that kind of thing. And so when something comes up, when there's a situation where you can actually say to somebody, that looks like that's my responsibility. That might be all you have to say. And then they say, I don't know what you mean by that. Don't say anything else. Leave it at that. Let them work with it. Because if they know it's really them, they won't be quite so sure what to say or what you're even up to. And I'm not giving you some kind of protocol for how to work with this necessarily, but less is better. If you're going to drive all blames into one, there's no driver happening there. Just be responsible for that. And that's going to show up differently depending on who it is. If it's a 12-year-old person, or if it's someone who's in their 80s, or if it's someone who is your partner, or someone who is your coworker, or whatever, it's going to have a different kind of a situation. But to understand that slogan, drive all blames into one. Well, if you understand it, and if you're a meditator, if you're spending a lot of time training your mind to see clearly, training your mind to not buy into your own self-deception. Don't settle for anything you're looking at. If it shows up as something, sounds suspicious to me. So
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Yume, do you have a question? I saw something come up with your name, but maybe it went away. Yume? No. Here he is. Hi. Okay. Very good. We'll close then, and people in the monastery, or whoever's in the Zendo we can dedicate the merit and close for the evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji Ho San Shi Shi San Gu Sa Mo Ko Sa Mo Ko Ja the 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Varmita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect SokukoJi Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.
Very good. See you all eventually in some other place or time.